Hey. Oh, I want to take the time to talk a little about my wife, our relationship, just because, well, she's someone that nobody really knew, and in the sense that she had no friend. I don't know. I mean, she may have had people online. I'm sure she had people online still that she related with. But there was no sharing of that with me any longer. Where we met online stopped being places, basically. Where we communicated previously stopped being places, and stopped being places she would go. And I haven't even investigated or tried to look into any of that, and I'm not sure I should. Because I think the things that I might find will only cause me pain, even if they cause understanding. I can't see any positives to it. So I'll give you what slice I have, but between us, we had no friends in the area for the most part. I tried some gaming, but that sort of decayed, and I mean, I at least have contacts there, some of whom have reached out, and contacts from the bar that have reached out, etc. I appreciate that, but it's like I never felt like I hung out and became close with anyone. I'm not sure how much I'm capable of that. And for her, she had basically no contact with anyone other than me from basically the day she came to America, and before that, like the friends that she had in Belgium still, her social anxiety had put her in a position where she no longer really had them. Though we did, I think, run into somebody she knew in Brussels, which was pretty shocking, because that's not a small city, but it was a particular area of nightlife where she had once been able to cope with. Our relationship was different from any other I've had, and not in a good way. It's not, neither of us met our expectations and hopes of what we would get out of being with the other. That's for certain. That's for certain. All prior relationships that I had a very, very strong passion to them in terms of not just sexual chemistry that was really there, but also an intellectual desire to engage all the time, and the two are kind of related, but there were other things that made them related. So I would go out for long walks with other people. Now, I went for long walks with my wife, and we spent time together, but not the same kind of degree, because her inability to cope with the outside, her lack of desire to be out in the world in any sense, and it's more difficult for me to have a nice long talk when there's not that sort of, pushing on, moving, chattering, whatever. But there were just so many differences, and it all feels like it's a bundled up thing that led to a certain level of isolation from each other. Much of that was her own choice, I think. Much of it was my own choice. Somewhere in my life, during my first marriage, I started becoming more and more distant in just who I am. When I was in my 20s, I was very, very not sure what the word is for it. I want to say loving, compassionate, these things, but not in sort of a traditional sense, of course. I mean, we're talking about me here, but where I would let whoever I was with be everything to me. They talk about women who love too much or whatever, and I felt like I was in that kind of situation. That doesn't mean that I was clingy and wanted to be with them all the time. I always had my very strong space boundaries, where maybe I didn't, want to spend a great deal of time with someone every day. I have my games to play. But something, and reading books. I love reading, and I've grown disassociated from that too. Because between the videos and so here's the biggest thing. The biggest suck on me is the fucking computer. Work is bad enough, right? Work takes 8 hours of my day every day, which is a lot better than it did when I had to commute. But between paying attention to online news, between the Flash games I play, between the games that I play elsewhere. Before that, much less now, forums, paying attention on Facebook, all that kind of stuff. That had become my social existence. Yeah, I'm not talking about my life. What the fuck is wrong with me, right? But I feel like this context needs to be explored, and this is where I always go wrong, right? Is I don't explain, well, I don't know if I go wrong, but I fail to get to the topic because I have to lay so much context. And this is true whenever I'm talking about anything. And some of this is exploring, hey, why the fuck did things go so wrong? And a lot of that's in me, and some of that's in her. Because in the end, it's that not meeting each other's expectations of what a relationship should be like that drove us further and further apart. Not in any sort of angry way. It just became the same kind of distance that I ended up, and it happened very quickly here, that I ended up in with my first wife. Now with my first wife, it took a long time. It not a huge long time, but it took a few years of settling down. Every relationship of any length, I think, you have that passion that brings you together, but then there's this drawing away, and that becoming not quite as intrinsically linked. And I am, as I said, I am incredibly needy, or was. All my relationships were fairly short, before that. And comparatively, again, they didn't reach that 4 years living together or whatever, which is where that drift starts to happen, I think. But with my first wife, that drift accelerated when she went to school. And I felt like I couldn't put demands on her time anymore. This wasn't something she really expressed necessarily. But in that increased the distance between us, and that became an accelerating process. I would, no longer ask the things of her that I would look for previously, in terms of like, hey, let's spend time playing a game together, or let's go for a walk for a day or whatever, because her time off became so valuable that she had to do studies and such. And I tried to help with those, to link in there. I still cared enough at that point for that. By the time, she was still studying languages and whatnot. She had graduated, but was trying to get into position, to get into grad school, and to a large extent, my caring for her became making dinner each night, keeping the place kind of cleaner than I would naturally do, And I think I was no longer meeting those needs of being so needy myself with her. I walked out of that knowing that I could never be so reliant again. Now, what I didn't realize was what I meant there was financially reliant. I went and I got myself in a position where I could get a job, where I could take care of myself for the rest of my life. And I love the fact that she gave me that freedom to be, to just be, and to be willing to support me financially for the most part. While I'd piddle around doing, I'd do small jobs or whatever at times, maybe for up to a couple of years, but there was no real pressure of, you gotta be working, man. We need your income. We need you to be of some value. There was never any of that. And that was sort of part of the bargain that I paid forward this time. Maybe not wisely. Maybe not wisely. Because there are negatives to not having, a structure and not being forced to be on it, whatever. I mean, you form your patterns and structure and whatever, but there's a difference when you owe it somewhere else, to school, to work, to whatever. Between that and that freedom. Now, I wanted that freedom so much. I wanted that always, and I still kind of do. There's a problem with it, though. Like, I would have no problem with it if I was leading the life of, an actor or something who had made a bit of money and now was sort of a semi-celeb and had buddies I could hang out with and get drunk with every day and have no financial worries at all. That doesn't sound unappealing to me, I know of people, may have even met a couple who are in that kind of position. And I'm not sure I'm really, glorifying it or anything. It's just that at least you have contacts with other people built in there. This is the whole thing. Both my wife and I, my most recent ex, had too easy a capacity to withdraw from human contact, whatever that meant. But yeah, she would never. There was no desire to go out and to be around people. There was no desire to meet new people, particularly. Maybe very early in our relationship there kind of was, but then it became, the fear was too much, the comfort of home. Reminds me of the Clifford Simlack book, City, which discusses exactly, just so much. I may even have it kicking around here. It discusses so much how leaving your house becomes a difficult thing. You're just so comfortable in this very static, isolated situation. And she and I would go and go shopping, But that was about the only thing we did this year, is we would go out and pull the groceries once every 2 weeks. It had gotten to the point where there was almost nothing other than that she would do. Now last year there were a few more things, but every year it was declining, less and less willing to go outside, even for just a walk in the woods, even for just a walk down the street. There's a street near me where there are llamas, and it's like, I saw them, I don't know, maybe 6 weeks ago or so, and went there once, twice, and then convinced her to go, because we used to have chickens and goats near us, and used to love to see them on the way, just on simple walks. We'd go visit these animals. Well, this was a little further, and we couldn't get close to them, but it was neat to see. But everything, we used to go for these walks to see chipmunks, and that was maybe 2 years ago, before the pandemic mostly. And not a whole hell of a lot. I mean, we're talking about, that would be 1 extra walk a month, maybe 2 extra walks a month at most, in the best of times. And that would be all for her in terms of leaving the house. I mean, part of that is she insisted on putting makeup on every time she left the house, which increases the burden. First of all, I can't just be like, hey, you want to go for a walk right now? And I don't know if when I did do that, that burden and the fact that maybe that would vaguely irritate me would play on her. But yeah, I mean, it would take her an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and a half to get ready, just, to walk around the fucking block. Now, I would tend to try to suggest in advance because of that. Like, I'd give her 3 hours warning or something, which she pretty much needed, because there would never be the, hey, you want to go? Yeah, sure. It had to be at least the hour warning. It probably had to be more than that for her to psych herself up to actually do it. But knowing me, if I was in her shoes, that extra burden, that extra hour of getting ready would be a huge disincentive to ever wanting to leave the house. I mean, even when I go dancing, sometimes I go as a complete slob. There were times when I put a little effort in and I try to get dressed up kind of fancy or something. But that's by choice. It's not part of the absolute routine. And if I spend an hour getting ready, which is extreme for me, we're not talking about most cases at that point. I'm talking about maybe I dyed my hair that day, or and tried to fit, clothes I can't wear anymore because I'm too fucking fat. But yeah, I had things that were kind of costumey that would take me a while to get ready. Those kind of things. That's an excitement getting ready. That's a different kind of nature. That's not like, I got to get dressed up, or I've got to put makeup on to go to the supermarket, or to go out for a walk in the woods where we're not going to interact with anyone. Now, theoretically, it should have been a lot easier with the masks. But you don't wear the mask all the time, so it didn't really help. Because even someone walking across the street from her. And the reason was she thought she was incredibly ugly. She wasn't. Not to me, at least, and I don't think anybody would have seen her that way. But she was incredibly critical of her face, especially. And, I mean... I'm not the lying type, so I couldn't be like, oh my God, you're the most gorgeous thing in the world, or anything like that. But I could tell her she was pretty, and she'd just be like, no, you're just lying to me, kind of stuff. She would never believe it. She would never believe that at best, she would believe that I had really awful taste. And the things she saw as these horrible flaws that had to be covered up with makeup, a little dark circle under her eye, I mean, coloration, whatever. It wasn't like she was patchy or anything. And that was always a thing. Like, even before we had ever met, I was like, wow, you wear makeup, that's weird. Like, I'm used to people I'm with who knew how to put on makeup and would wear it for special occasions, but never the everyday type of thing. The only person I ever dealt with really who was in that, I mean, obviously I worked with women who had that kind of sickness, but it was my mom. My mom felt like, she couldn't go out anywhere without her makeup on. But she was not as bad as my wife was. My wife wouldn't go out for a walk at night, where nobody would see her, to look at Christmas lights, right? Just in our neighborhood, down the hill and whatnot. She could not do that without that hour of makeup, even though there's just no way anyone could see her, that went beyond my understanding of what there was there. And early on, that was the kind of thing that, I would really rag on her about. Eventually, it just became part of life. You make these compromises, you make these concessions to make life work, right? And those comfortable compromises and concessions are part of the decay of the intensity and where the passion could be. I gotta switch batteries. And there were major major concessions there. So when we were first talking online and whatnot, one of the vital things for me was, look, you have to be willing to play games with me. And she was mentally capable of doing so. Wasn't always all that interested, but was making the effort for that. There were other more unspoken things like sex that we both, I assume, thought that sex was a part of a normal relationship. I mean, neither of us were asexual by bent. For me, there were other things like that, being able to go for a walk or whatever. For her, there were things that were maybe not well stated. Some of mine may not have been as well. But in a large part, neither of us met the other's most desirable life. And one of the things is that decline towards comfort, right? That decline towards comfort is, it fits in with something I've talked about at other times, the happiness versus joy, or, different types of happiness. And there's sort of a comfort happiness. And it is almost inimical to the ecstatic pleasure or just great joy, or whatever you want to say. And it is that latter, that joy, that brings and binds, the love, not just romantic love either, the love of a new friend that you're able to sit and talk to about cool shit or whatever. But eventually most of those conversations get hashed out, and how many times can you have them again, right? And then what does it become? It becomes just small talk. It becomes, oh, I saw this today. This is cool. I thought you'd be interested in it. Being able to bring things to people. Well, when we were interacting initially on chat forums, we started out on a dating site where I think she noticed me because I was such a troll, and a certain kind of troll, not like, I don't know. Most trolls are just, they throw memes at you, or they make a little quip or something. I would do that. I would make the quips. I was never the meme type. I would make quips, but the quips would usually not just be like, I don't know. But I would also go deeply into subjects. But I would use the parsimony of the troll, rather than, I wouldn't give you the too long didn't read version of stuff that connects all the dots, because I don't do that. Even at work, my communications is almost troll-like, in the sense that I try to distill things to a sentence or two, and I skip a lot of spaces of the thinking, and sometimes I don't even go through them myself. But that's just the way I operate. Been a lot of muscle ache. I made the mistake of challenging myself to try to do 100 push-ups, and I got about halfway there, and my arms just said, nope. someone local reached out. I broke quarantine and hung out with folk. But just had a good night. Dealing with people in a way that I haven't done in so long. I don't know. We'll see. So largely, one thing that came of her inability. First of all, there was her inability to go out to experience things. Her lack of desire towards things that were kind of an effort, and mine too. I have it too. Is that we just started spending less and less time doing anything together. We didn't dislike each other. I went through a couple years early on with, why the fuck are we together? Because this happened very quickly. And if we had had a relationship, if we had had sort of a normal situation where I had met her in America, in my town, and maybe we moved in together or something, and we each had our own capability to support ourselves and everything, this would have never lasted any length of time. I mean, we probably would have never moved in together. Had we instead met online and tried something in a city in the same way, we might have ended up stuck together in the same way. We wouldn't have ended up married, at least. I don't believe in marriage. She didn't believe in marriage. The peculiarities, and in a lot of ways, we were less connected and associated than my first wife and I were, in terms of we didn't mingle our finances. I just bought everything, that she needed to live, and she used her money, whatever she made, to buy her drugs from China to kill herself and whatever. No, I mean, she bought her hobbies. She bought her tarot cards. She bought herself a computer. Had she asked, I would have been able to float those things without a problem, but I think it was better to have her, better for her to have her own financial situation, but she ended up spending what amounted to savings to solve a temporary problem. When we first moved to Eugene, we moved out of Phoenix, so I never wanted to be in Phoenix. I always was looking at, I want to get back to Eugene. I would love to get back here. Well, I would have loved to do that within the first few years of when I was in Phoenix. After that, things here were obviously changing. The 80s night had started decreasing. At some point it moved out of where it was, and I wasn't even, I knew it still existed, but I didn't know if it was at all. It was not the same thing. It just wasn't. It wasn't the same crazy scene when I came back. It wasn't the must-be-at location. But it was enough. And I loved the idea of being in the Pacific Northwest in general, Eugene being the highest point, because I knew some things about the town that I really loved. Some of those things have gone away, so like the university. I can't wander around on the university anymore because they've made it no smoking. So now, I can be near it, but there's something I liked about being on the university campus itself. Maybe, I don't know. I liked sitting there watching people walk by while I smoke, because it's a more interesting environment than a city street is, or a park, for people watching. So, I thought I charging. She hated Phoenix entirely. I had made certain peace with it. I had moved into a place I really liked. I could go swimming every fucking day, a couple of times a day if I wanted to. Once I was working from home, it made nice, I'd take a work break for 15 minutes to just go out, do a couple laps, come back in, especially in the summertime. Felt real nice. I'd get the mail and I'd go swimming. It was, I had no, I almost certainly have seasonal affective disorder. It didn't impact me one bit in Phoenix, or it impacted me very, very little. The days were always perfect, except for a few that weren't, but those were interesting. The days were always perfect in the sense that, it might be hideously hot, but there was never a day when I would look out the window and say, oh, how dreary, I'm being brought down by that. Although, I have to say, the grief in the rain, it's more poignant. It's more real. It feels righter. I don't know how the dichotomy, if I was in the sunshine all the time, would feel to me. But the sunlight, the clear skies, every day being almost the same, it meant that, I'm not someone who likes to go outside a whole hell of a lot, or who tends to. I like it in theory. I don't tend to actually do it. And that's the concessions thing, right? You'd be happier doing something, but life is easier if you don't. It's the same thing that fits in with the relationship. You'd be happier if you made the effort to get X, or pushed for that, or agreed to do X with your partner. But it's easier not to. It's really the same kind of thing. The thing that drives those the concessions that make a relationship kind of just go on. They're the same concessions that make life go on, right? You're living less intensely, but more comfortably. You're not putting as much effort in, and that's really the key to that. But anyway, it was very, very easy. I could look out the window and say, oh, it's a beautiful day, I should go outside for it. Well, first of all, I did a lot of times, not for very long, for the amount of time that I liked, and went for my little swim, which was just a nice pattern in my life. I don't have anything like that here. I sit in my fucking chair and I play computer games. That's my pattern now. Not that I didn't do those things in Phoenix. But yeah, I would have some physical activity outside, which was good. I got more vitamin D because my whole body's exposed while I'm swimming. Even for just a few minutes. Here, I get none, I'm inside all the time. Even when it's beautiful weather here, though, it's an effort to get anywhere where I can do anything other than walk in the woods. And while I love walking in the woods, and, it was one of the few things my wife was willing to do with me. Anyway, I'm going way off of where I want to be here. So what happened was, while there were big advantages to Phoenix in terms of it was the only place I had never been depressed, I wasn't sure why. It was also the only time when I had a job that, I liked having, and I felt like was worth keeping, I very seldomly felt like, shit, I don't want to go in. Now, that happened for me at the first place, and now it's starting to actually happen here, even though I'm working from home and there's no effort in it. I was starting to feel I don't want to go to work. I want to take a day off. But yeah, I had a job that, in all cases, that was much better than anything I had had before in my life. But also, there was the weather. And the weather meant that I never felt like I wasted a beautiful day, because there were an infinite number of them. They were going to stretch out forever. I mean, it wasn't like, oh my God, this is the last pretty day that I'm going to have this fall, or it might be. I also had a simpler life there. I was living in a condo. I didn't have to do all the repair work that I have to do here. And I had a realtor who was helpful. Very helpful, in fact. So anyway, what happened there, though, was she hated it from the beginning. To her, she called it hell. She said it was like Portugal, just hot and dry and, no trees. And there was so little. But, there were oases. There was the zoo. The area around the zoo, there were some trees, there were ducks, there was water. It was worth being there, but it was so much less. And the big thing was the walk to go shopping. The one thing that we did, right, still, was just hideous. I mean, it was concrete, concrete and strip malls the whole way. Phoenix is an ugly, ugly city. But I could not, it was hard for me to justify the move, even after I was working from home and could theoretically move anywhere, because I was still a contractor for the first couple of years, and there was no assurance I was going to be working full time. And then once I was hired full time, I started really playing with the idea of moving back to Eugene, but there was fear. There was, because the city I knew wasn't the same. I knew changes had happened. There were a lot of things to get in the way. And what I did was, I started playing with the bargain, the idea of, hey, what if we, rent there and live there a year and see what's happening? Well, that idea didn't come to fruition, but initially. But what happened was, we started feeling, and she blames me for this, vibrations from the floor, from the people under us. And I don't know if some work was done on the place underneath me. Well, I know some work was done on the place underneath me. But after a new group of people moved in, I became very, very sensitive to the vibrations underneath. Now, I made my peace with them, but I infected her, essentially, with not being able to cope with them anymore. And, I mean, there would be nobody down there, and maybe a ceiling fan running at most. And it would feel like everything was vibrating. Now, I kind of get that here at times with the rumble from the street and everything, but it was I was becoming hypersensitized to it, and somehow I made it much, much worse for her, to the point where we could not stay there any longer. So I made the decision to make the move. We set that up, drove up to Eugene carrying, maybe half my stuff, maybe a little less. Not a lot in the way of game stuff. And the intention was, let's see if this is the place. If it's not, whatever. Left most of my stuff, or the rest of my stuff, in Phoenix, which, is kind of a frightful thing, but whatever. And moved into a place here. We had neighbors upstairs who moved in soon after us, who were really noisy. So, we moved in March, and sometime in the summer it was becoming clear that we couldn't stay in that condo, not even condo, that apartment complex, which I kind of liked the place. It was, it was in a pretty area, near shopping, very convenient. There was a little bit of a hill that was tough to pull my cart up, but it was very steep for a little bit, but not like what I'm on now. And I was playing around with the idea of, well, where the hell, what could we live in, whatever. But given that there was, thin walls, whatever, and too much noise, made the decision, okay, I'll start looking for a place. Because I was very happy with the town. And places around where we lived were fairly expensive, and it wasn't really where I wanted to be. It was kind of a shame because it turned out to be an incredibly convenient place to be. The walk downtown was shorter. The walk to the Whitaker was much shorter, and campus was far away, but I had learned that campus wasn't that useful to me. I'm not sure. I was vaguely looking for places at this point. And I was also looking for an old cemetery that I had once found. And for whatever reason, just because it was a really cool place. It's the Old Masonic Cemetery in Eugene. But I had found it when I had run into a part of it that sort of was completely overgrown, and it was really weird. And now it's like, still somewhat overgrown, but it's obviously part of a cemetery now and everything. But while looking for that, I came across a place that was for sale that looked beautiful, but it was obviously way out of my price range, on this hill. And I kept walking around, and it was, pretty. I decided to look into it, see how much it was. I knew it was too much for me, too big a house. So I looked, and yeah, it was like $1 million. And well, okay. But then I started looking at other houses in the same area because it was obvious here near Hendricks Park, there was this beautiful forest, and I wasn't far from the city, I was in the city still, officially. So we found like 3 places we wanted to look at, and went and investigated each of them. Actually more like 5, but 3 were of interest. One was obviously way too much. It was really more like 2 houses in one. It wasn't a duplex, it was actually 2 separate houses. There was this one, and there was another one that turned out to be in bad shape. But when we came to this one to look at it, with the realtor, we walked here to meet the realtor here. Across the street from the house, there were turkeys and deer in someone's yard. And it was just so obvious, I had a park right behind me, just this woods, this forest. And I felt very drawn here. More importantly, in some ways, it seemed like exactly what she wanted. You know, she loved the woods, everything. Now, she was more reasonable than I was with like are you sure you want to be, you know, how are we going to do shopping here? All that kind of stuff. And I'm like, I don't know, but I know this is the place, you know. And a lot of that, like, I don't know if I would have picked it on my own, but I definitely was the one who pushed for it. Like, my desires for a place mixed with, for a kind of unique type situation, mixed with what she would want, being right in the woods that are never going to go away, you know? I mean, other than through global warming, obviously, because the trees are just dying. But, yeah, with all the little animals about and everything. And yes, it put me in a more isolated position than I was in before. It put me further from the river in a sense too. It's about as long a walk to the river probably, maybe a little longer, but it's not the same walk to the river. So from where I was before, I could walk to the river through Alton Baker Park. There would be people there, that would mean something to me. I'd be heading right into the city that way. All kinds of good things about that. So yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, it put me in a more isolated position, which made it harder for a few things. You know, it made gaming on Saturdays harder, harder enough that it was difficult for me to keep up with it. And as soon as it started becoming less valuable, I started not going. But yeah. And I don't feel like I'm talking enough about her, of course. You know, that's what it was intended to be. Our sex life was like everything else. You know, it started out insufficient, in my opinion. She was a virgin when we met, and I was not. I had certain expectations of an openness and a real comfort with sex and everything, really. And she had her expectations, which were more about it being a romantic thing, you know. I wasn't used to that. So women who I had been with previously, I would say almost invariably were the aggressor. And were, you know, fairly comfortable in their own sexuality and were not terribly coy about things. And while romantic might be a part of something that could happen and could be, yeah, you know, it wasn't there most of the time. The passion was there and everything, but it wasn't like, you know, I don't know. And add to that, that sex was just incredibly painful for her. And neither of us liked going to doctors. It wasn't something she could cope with, particularly. And we just never really, you know, came down to, well, this is so important, we have to fix this, given that we already had these, like, things that got in the way. But I mean, here's the thing, you know, I mean, I enter her after getting her aroused and everything, and it's obvious she's in pain. And it's like, he can't really do this, you know? I mean, it wasn't, it was just like, this is not, it's not like, yeah. And the other thing is, for me, the sex itself is not that big a thing. It's other things involved in sex, so, you know. But anyway, it all kind of, it just started deteriorating there. You know, it went from not very good with some hopes that it could get better to, screw it, it's just not worth the effort for either of us. And we both gave up. And the sad thing is that she took it as, I'm not attracted to her or something. And that really wasn't the case. I mean, like, physically, I was relatively attracted to her. It was, we weren't, our sexualities were just not really compatible. You know, that was what kind of got in the way there. And that was weird. I've never been in that kind of situation before. And if I'm in an uncertain situation, or I don't know if the other person is interested, I will never take a first move. It was hard, you know, when we first met, basically, after being online for a while or whatever. It was very hard because I had to take that aggressive stance. There's no way she would. She's totally not. So, I mean, there we have the other barrier, is once sex became not really a regular thing, it's not like I would make any movements towards that. And because of who I am, physical contact is weird if there's not, like, a sexual component to it, sort of. So, like, you know, we wouldn't hug the way lovers hug. We wouldn't kiss that way. We would kiss, it would be a chaste little kiss goodbye every day until the pandemic came, and then we'd wave. I waved to her when she was dead, too. Didn't want to kiss her. I couldn't get that close to that dead body. But, yeah, I mean, we were basically doomed all along. And we both knew it, you know, even before we got married, we knew it was going to fail. We knew it was not going to be what we wanted in that. That's what I mean, fail. Not, I thought it was going to fail. I don't know if she probably did too. It didn't, except that it also didn't bring enough pleasure in her life, enough reason to make up for the misery that she had already. But here's the thing. I don't think she had a whole hell of a lot of hope when we did meet. And I almost feel like, from things she said at that time and everything, that, like, you know, if I cut her loose or something, that was it, you know. So I had this extreme burden where even if I could have, and that was hard. I mean, like, I couldn't make the decision. With her coming to be with me, with her cutting ties, with her without any real future, I couldn't make the rational choices. So, you know, I mean, I loved her, but I would not have made the choice, you know, to continue on. But I felt too much responsibility, um, uh, and had already seen and had no hopes. I mean, that's also the thing, for both of us, it was an act of desperation. Having someone around, rattling around, making noises, someone I could talk to every so often, that was significantly better. It's not like I was in Phoenix for quite a few years and didn't find anything, My best chances of meeting people were how I met her, through OkCupid, which had some really nice forums. Forums of a type where, first of all, everybody's there for, ostensibly at least, some just for the quizzes, but everybody's there really, one would think for meeting people, which means that there's certain expectations. Now, I wasn't going to reach out to anybody, but I would at least like people in the hopes that they reached out to me. They overhauled the site like MySpace. MySpace was another place where, I had contacts with people that might have meant something. But yeah, through the internet of a certain time, 10 years ago, longer, I found a lot easier to cope with. Things were threaded forums, where you could have real discussions in public. You could play with people in public, and you could play with people on many different levels and get to know them. And it's just like I am with games, right? With games, I cannot handle the idea, and as I've said before, I've been on one date in my life and it was miserable. It's not something I do. My usual way of meeting people before my last wife, and yes, I'm not using her name on purpose, actually, especially because somebody kind of creeped me out with, like, you must reveal her name. Wow, no. We didn't use names with each other, so, except where absolutely necessary. But shit, I had a train and it flew by. I don't know. Anyway, there was this peculiar time in the internet when there was a lot of room. Oh yeah. It's like in gaming, where I don't want to get together for a 2-player game with someone. That is fucking weird to me. That's too intimate. I don't want a private message with people. That's too intimate. Until we've tested each other out a little bit in public. Seen, I need to see your mettle before, and who you are before I'm willing to trust. I am going to commit to spending time with just you, whether it's playing a 2-player war game or whatever, or, and I mean, I might be able to play a war game in public with someone. That would be different. Or to take things to private messages. I don't feel comfortable. Like, what if I feel trapped with the person in the message? It's hard to get rid of them. I mean, if they're obviously not... if they're obviously ignoring things and not being, respectful, that's different. But what if they're being honest, compassionate, respectful and everything, yet they contact me and it is a burden? What the fuck do I do? It would be rude to shun them. I've got to kind of... It's just, damn it, man. It's very hard for me to cope with people in that one-on-one type situation. And this is the thing, everybody that I had been with before, I had met in some sort of social gathering, I would say. I'm trying to think. Everything that worked right, definitely. I met with other people around where I didn't have to play just to them. I could play to the crowd and start to see, So either groups of friends or at a coffee shop or something like that. Always something where it's not just, where I don't, so here's the thing. Almost no female is going to go up to a male and be like, wow, you're hot. At least that's my thinking. It doesn't happen to me usually. When it does, it's because I'm dancing or whatever. There's something else there because I'm, Anyway, that act of approaching someone that you know nothing about, that you've seen nothing about, to me, that's an invasive act. To me, that's horrible. Like, oh, you look pretty, so I'm going to try to start a conversation with you, and I can't just say, wow, you look like someone I'd like to fuck, but I want to get to know you better first. I mean, even I don't have balls for that. There are people who are into the, you want to get out of here and just fuck, That's not this. This is like, I feel like the only way to explain this is in a data-like fashion. Well, I find you physically appealing, and if I find that there's anything in your brain to match and in your personality, I would be interested in pursuing a relationship. But that's the honesty in me. That's the only thing that I'd say. On the other hand, if I'm in front of people talking, interacting with a group, well, first of all, I'm the one who's becoming the peacock. Not the peacock, but I'm the one who's showing off, right? So it becomes safe for her to approach me, and it becomes, it's also something that can be done kind of in situ. We can flirt a little bit at the table, with other people around. So there's that safety of not feeling committed to it yet. Yeah. And of course, I have no problem with flirting. I'm not terribly good at it, as you might imagine, especially now. But what I totally am not good at is, this pretending that, I don't know. I'm not good at the, maybe this is worth spending an hour with you because I don't know you yet. I have to know a lot about you in terms of there has to be a spark there already. And that's not something I'm going to get off of anything. There's something so unnatural about the approach conversation, whether by IM, PM, at a bar, it doesn't matter. There's something so unnatural about it that just feels wrong to me, and it's so alien. And also, I think it's the violation aspect, and I would never do it to someone and I feel kind of wow, I don't know what kind of person would do this, but it feels wrong, you know? Anyway, the nature of that particular dating site at that particular time was very interesting. You could go on there, you could troll each other on the fora, and you started running into people. It started dying at some point or another. After they got took over by the same thing, Plenty Offish or whatever. That's how I always read it. What does that mean? That's kind of cool. It's like a standoffish type place. Oh no, like, yeah, fuck that. That's stupid. But I think they got bought out by the same people, and they started supporting less and less of, I think, advertising, less in terms of trying to get people to go there, less and less of the quiz side of things, less and less of the fora, and it was all these ancillary things that made it interesting to me. I am not at all interested in whatever the Tinder or whatever type model is. You know, look for people and then, you know, try to pounce on them. and you know, maybe even the matching, but you have to make that approach. They had that, but that wasn't what was appealing to me. Unfortunately, I think, anyway, we met through my trolling, and I ended up inviting her to another site that I ran, where there were a bunch of my friends, and she fit in very well there, and we got into deeper types of conversations without the same. Well, we'll have to do this a little differently so that I can be plugged in. Without the same, oh God, I hurt. Same kind of trolling, and different kinds, you know. And she grew close with a couple of the people on the site, and I thought that was pretty cool. And I don't know, that helped form the bonds, you know, bringing someone into your friendship circle. I think it was already obvious at that point that, you know, there was a romantic interest. She wasn't the first foreign person that promised to come see me or whatever. There was a girl from Sweden who was supposed to. Now I don't know if she existed or not. I mean, you know, it could have been totally a catfishing type thing. But, yeah, she had promised when I was in contact with her in Eugene before I moved to Phoenix. And she had pretty much made it sound like she was going to come to Phoenix. On my trip there, she essentially ghosted me and just disappeared from everywhere. Everywhere. Which I thought was really weird. Like, I mean, I don't feel like she was created to try to catfish me, but she might have been created for some other reason, and someone, by someone as a sock puppet or whatever, and then they did that. It was a funny situation, though, because it actually helped me make my mind up, you know, to try this new city. Because there was some hope there, and she was excited about a desert. And I wasn't going to find anything reasonable work-wise here. My prospects were pretty damn dim, as they would be now if I left my job. I mean, I might be able to find some other remote work. But yeah, if if I end up losing this job, I might be in a position where I have to leave here anyway. Although I don't think I will. I think this is where I want to. I think this is where I want to die. This house. This house feels like it's very close to one in my dreams. Anyway, where did we go? Yeah. So, the unnaturalness of having to reach out so far, but it was my only hope at that point, really. I had very, very few people in Eugene whom I felt that I was making a connection to and that I had any chances with, and one of them was a total misread. Another would have worked out, and I could have been very comfortable with, but she didn't approach me until leaving, until when she was leaving, basically, and then even then, we got together a few times after that, but I don't know. It never felt like it clicked completely. It didn't click completely with my last wife either, though. It felt maybe a little better, but not enough better to justify, It was the same kind of, I don't know, it just didn't feel to me like we were on the same, I don't know, it just didn't feel right to me in a lot of ways. So anyway, and then in Phoenix itself, I met no one. I mean, I never had a friend over my house. I haven't had one here either. I never had, you can see why. No, I mean, I never had, did I go to anyone's house in Phoenix? At least in Eugene, I can remember hanging out with people a couple of times that I met, like drinking or whatever, dancing. I don't think, from work, I went to people, I visited people from work a couple of times, like they would have a party or something, and I would go to their house for that. But yeah, there was basically nothing, and at least here, things feel a little looser. I feel, I've had a couple of people invite me into their house, that's different, it feels like, I don't know, but I was such an anomaly in Phoenix, and I don't feel I don't feel out of place here. I feel like I belong in this town. So that's a big difference too. I don't know. But yeah, the decay of a relationship, I think that's a standard thing. I think the fact that I am so incredibly flawed in certain ways, and I know everybody says, hey, everybody's flawed. Yeah, not everybody's flawed to the extent that they can't lead a normal life, okay? And my wife was more broken than I am. Maybe, yeah, more broken than I've ever been. In terms of being able to align with a normal life. I may have been with other people who were too. I've been with people who are less broken than I am, I would say overall. It's a spectrum, right? I mean, actually, it's more like a manifold because there's so many different dimensions you can be damaged in. Um, but most people I know have been able to cope with a real existence better than I have. My psycho ex, the other person who died where I lived, was a different case, whom I would say she was probably more broken than I am, but for good reason. And it was kind of weird because in certain ways she could function a whole lot better than I can in terms of like, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. She might have been on about par with me. But it led her down very, very bad paths. Yeah. And I think the problem is that someone who is as broken and as needy, because when you're unable to find, a lot of smaller connections with people, more and more of your life becomes this central connection if you can have it. And that's true for me, and it doesn't mean that a lot of time has to be spent together. So she and I did not need each other. A lot of ordinary couples probably spend a lot more time together and do a lot more together than we did. But the importance of what little we had was high. And where there's nothing else to rely on, it becomes harder, And I had other things that she didn't. Like I had my work, where I was interacting with people, at least on the phone, a few times a week. It was about, I can't take much more than that. And she probably couldn't either, couldn't take even that. So her social anxiety put a particular burden in the sense that it made it so hard to expand and find someone else to be comfortable with, at any levels. And the way she always phrased me was that I was so light. Not quite sure what she meant by that, but in the sense that I wasn't oppressive, that somehow I just wasn't a burden. Well, maybe I was too light. Maybe I should have been more of a burden. Maybe I should have pushed more. I tried early on, though. I tried to make things different. Not just, in terms of, hey, do the things I want, but also trying to make her more comfortable with going out and stuff like that. And I think she made her try too. And what we came to was those compromises of comfort that don't get you moving in any better direction that don't make you live. You're not really living anymore. You're sealing yourself into that comfort. And I'm not sure where I stand on that still. In terms of like, is that I mean, there's a balance. It's just, there are things with the level of comfort that I've gotten myself to that are definitely overboard. So that's why I'm fattening up. That's why I'm unable, to reach out to people. But I'm afraid of the level of disruption that may be necessary for real change. All right. This did not go where it wanted. Or it went where it wanted. It didn't go where I wanted at all. I wanted to do sort of a non-eulogy, an honest, but it's hard. It's hard. It's hard to really describe, what even, I can tell you what she meant to me. She meant companionship. She meant someone who would accept the stupid shit that I insist on, that's more important in a sense than all the stuff that you expect from a relationship. So me dragging my cart with groceries, having to walk an hour and a half or an hour and 15 minutes each way with groceries. She accepted that. What kind of fucking idiot? I mean, normal people won't do that, right? She accepted a lot of things. In some ways, she was kind of like a child. The problem is, we both are. We're whatever. And I think that's always been the case for me. Is there's sort of a little bit of childhood in a relationship. I mean, you have to be, right? You're wanting someone to take care of you in some way. At least that's how I see it. That's how the dependency is there. But unfortunately, it wasn't terribly complimentary childhood or childlike qualities. They were maybe too similar in some ways, whatever. If instead of being insisting on wearing makeup going out, she insisted on getting a car and learning how to drive so that we got groceries by car. It would be the same kind of compromise type situation when they're facing the different expectations of their life. And those compromises can work out well, they can work out poorly. This one didn't work out too well in the end. Alright, I've babbled long enough. I don't know even what to title this shit.